That's awesome. That's great. I love it. We don't take ourselves too seriously around here, and that's a good thing. That is really, really a good thing. I heard a New Testament scholar say one time, he said, I learned a long time ago not to take myself too seriously and not take anybody else too seriously. I mean, there's some good lessons to be learned there. Anyway, appreciate it. Looking forward also August 5th to the men's gathering at Dan and Sue Newman's house. And I understand that Dan's house is a very, very, very fine house as well. So 2 cats in the yard. No, that didn't? Okay. Okay, all right. You know what I'm talking about. Come on. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Anyway, looking forward to that. And as I said, my wife and I are excited about having a little time off. It's been a very busy summer. It's been a very busy last 10 months or so. And so we're excited for a little chance to get away and then to come back recharged and ready to go. What I want to do today is to look at a couple of individuals here that are mentioned very briefly in Hebrews 11, but there's some very good things that I think we can take away from this. Next Sunday, of course, Dr. Mike Whitmer is speaking, and then the following Sunday, Dr. John Duff will be here as well. And so I'm leaving you in very good hands for these next 2 weeks. I want to talk about the faith of Jacob and the faith also of Moses' parents. Hebrews chapter 11 is a chapter that speaks of the faith of those who have preceded these believers, have preceded us, and the importance of their role. It is a passage that then is addressed collectively in chapter 12 when he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us." I believe that the great cloud of witnesses that we are surrounded by is the people that are listed in chapter 11. Sometimes that text is read as though this is unbelievers that we come into contact. I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think that since we have been preceded by a great number of believers, and he says also at the end of chapter 11 that the celebration, if you will, is on hold until such time as we arrive. They have finished their race. We are still running ours. And there's a lot of running to continue, as far as we know. We don't know exactly when the finish line is for each one of us. But we know that we're called to be faithful and to pursue it and to lay aside every sin and also the weight which easily comes upon us and run with patience the race that is set before us. The Christian life, as I've said before, is not a ride in the back seat of a limousine. It is a running race. It's not a sprint, but it's a marathon, which means it is not the intensity of the speed of the run as much as it is the faithful, plodding perseverance. I've run 4 marathons in my lifetime. I don't know that I'll ever run another one again because I don't know that I would survive it. But I run 4. The last one I ran was in 2001, and it's an interesting experience. You get to mile marker 1, and you realize you've got 25 plus miles to go, because it's 26.2 miles. You also realize that the last 6 miles are tougher than the first 20, because lactic acid builds up in your muscles, and it just takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of preparation. You have to load carbohydrates before you start running the race. There's a lot to it. And you just have to keep plodding on and keep going and keep going and keep going. When you're done, it's an amazing feeling. If you can bypass the sheer physical wear and tear, there's a real kind of high that you get from it. It's a real sense of accomplishment. And so the author of Hebrews likens our faith to running a long race. We have to keep being faithful. We're not just sitting in the back seat riding along. We're not along for the ride. We are here to be involved, and we are here to expend our energies. That's really what that's saying to us. Well, let's take a look at the faith here of Jacob, and then the faith of Moses' parents. We don't hear much about mom and dad. We don't know whether Moses' dad had a bumper sticker on his chariot, you know. My son led the Israelites out of Egypt, you know. my son was Israelite of the week or something like that, or Israelite of the month. I don't know. We don't think we had anything like that. We don't think of Moses' parents that much, but they are very important, the role that they played. Let's first of all look at this passage in verse 21 that speaks of the faith of Jacob. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. This is a story that's given to us in Genesis 48 in the first 22 verses. So if you want to hold your place there in chapter 11 and turn back to Genesis 48. Now, what's interesting about this, and one of the commentators I read said that in Genesis 49, we have Jacob blessing all of his sons. And that's a very important passage in Genesis 49. In Genesis 48, he blesses the sons of Joseph. Now remember, he had been separated from Joseph for many years. In fact, he had been led to believe by his other sons that Joseph was actually dead. Remember that? When they got upset with their brother for all of his crazy dreams, this is the master dreamer. Let's take him, we'll throw him in a pit, we'll sell him as a slave, and then we'll see what happens to his dreams. Well, you know what? His dreams came true anyway, because his dreams came from God. And so what they did was they took Joseph's coat of multiple colors, coat of many colors we sometimes call it. The Hebrew phrase is katunet pasim. And they took it and they put a bunch of animals' blood on it. And they didn't have DNA back then. There was no CSI or whatever. And they brought the cloak to Jacob and they said, "Is this your son's garment?" Notice they didn't say, "Is this our brother's garment? Is this your son's garment?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And he was led to believe from that then that his brother Joseph his son Joseph had been killed by some sort of wild animal. Not so. Joseph had been, sold into slavery in Egypt. Joseph became second in command in Egypt. And Joseph eventually was the one that his brothers dealt with when they came to buy grain during the time of the famine. And they didn't recognize him. And if you know anything about how Egyptian men shave their heads and the way they made themselves look, it's understandable. And they hadn't seen him for a number of years. Plus, probably when they came into his presence, they weren't allowed to look at him. They were just supposed to look down. They probably didn't get a real good look at him for a lot of the time they were with him. They didn't realize who he was. So he is reunited with Jacob. And in Genesis 48, verse 1, it says, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." This is Jacob, his father, is ill. And he is ill to the point where he is about to die. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel, that's Jacob, by the way, summoned his strength and sat up in bed. For me, sitting up in bed is a fairly leisurely activity. Probably is for you as well. Saturday morning, right? Reach over to the nightstand, maybe if you got a TV in the bedroom, grab the remote control, sit there and watch, Law and Order or something like that. That's not a whole lot of exertion for pretty much all of us. For Jacob, sitting up in bed was something he had to summon his strength for. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you a company of people, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And the offspring born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. For when I came from Padan, Rachel, to my sorrow, died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is modern-day Bethlehem. By the way, you can go to Bethlehem today and you'll find the traditional site of Sarah's tomb as well. Okay? And there's a lot of these places. And we don't know exactly for sure whether that's the location, but there's a very good possibility. When Israel, again, that's the name for Jacob, saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, I pray, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, and he could not see, so Joseph brought them near him. And he kissed them and embraced them, and Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children also. Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and he brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand upon the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has led me all my life, long to this day. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and in them let thy name be perpetuated, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. And let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand upon his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He shall also become a people and shall also be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendant shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, By you, Israel, will pronounce blessing, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you rather than to your brothers one mountain slope, which I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. This is a rather interesting tale, and a rather sordid tale, it will, in some respects. And it takes a little bit of effort to sort of untie this thing. Here's what we have. We have four characters in this particular scenario. We have Jacob, who, along with his son Joseph, this is his son that he thought was dead. This was his son who rose to great power in Egypt, despite being in prison, falsely accused of raping the wife of Potiphar. And then we have Joseph's two sons, Ephraim, who is the younger, and Manasseh, who is the older. And by the way, these two boys are adopted in this text. They become not the grandsons of Jacob, but legally, by birthright, the sons. So Joseph, there is no tribe of Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and those two sons, who are actually grandsons of Jacob, are on a par with the other sons of Jacob. So there actually becomes an extra tribe of Israel. You know, there are actually 13 tribes of Israel in the Bible. There's Levi, which we know them as the priestly tribe. They didn't have any territory. They had no land. If you were to look in the back of your Bible and find a map of where all the Reuben's here, and Simeon and Levi, Reuben and Simeon and Dan and Gad and Asher and Naphtali, all the rest, you'd find territories for each of those 12 sons. You will not find a territory for Levi. You will find Levitical cities, and the law of Moses stipulates the function of those Levitical cities. So the Levites had a few cities, but there was no land. That's because the Levites were the priestly tribe. They did not have land where they would have animals and crops and so forth. They would live off of the tithes of the people. This is why for many centuries, and even somewhat today, you'll find in churches where the pastor doesn't own his own house. The church provides a house for him. That is based on an understanding of the relationship of Levites to the rest of the Israelites. It's not a command. There's nothing in the Bible that says, thou shalt buy thy pastor a parsonage. Although, if you want to. In a way, that's what we're hoping this house down here at the end will be, at least an occasional parsonage, as well as other things. But you don't have to do that. And, I remember when financial people came along and said, it'd probably be really good for the pastor if he owned his own house. It's probably better for him in the long run, financially. And some people said, really? They weren't quite sure of that. And you say, well, there's nothing in the Bible that commands that the pastor has to have a parsonage. We have to be careful sometimes. We get kind of hung up on traditions and so forth as though that's what God says, and that's not always the case. So you got these 4 boys, okay? So Ephraim and Manasseh become referred to as what is called the Joseph tribes. That is to say, there are 13 tribes of Israel, including Levi. 12 of them have land, and the tribe of Levi itself does not. Now, what's interesting about this story, it is similar to the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob is the younger brother, Esau is the older brother, and Jacob goes to his sort of sowing wild oats, if you will, which for Jacob was living by his own wits. And he did pretty well doing that. He tricked his brother Esau out of the blessing and out of the birthright, but then he met Laban, Rachel's father. And he was a whole lot better at it. He said, Jacob, you're a rookie, young fella. If you think you're good, now he didn't say that, but that's probably what he thought. You remember when Jacob fell in love with Rachel, and he wanted to marry Rachel? And he said, okay, we can arrange that, but you'll have to work 7 years to get her. Okay, I can do that. And you remember what happened? It'd be hard to pull this one off today. But they get to the wedding, and the wedding ceremony is complete, and the bride apparently has all kinds of veils, and they get married, and they go into the tent, and the next morning, in the light of day, Jacob opens his eyes and looks at his brand new bride, and it's the other sister, Leah, and he's furious. I saw this very well depicted once in a movie that was on TV a number of years ago. He comes running out of the tent looking for Laban. Laban says, "Oh, good Jewish guy, right? Oi, what can I say? This is the way it is. It's not right to marry the younger daughter before the older daughter. So if you want the younger daughter too, that's going to cost you 7 more years." And the Bible says that Jacob agreed. It seemed like 7 days. So he was Jacob. He was the heel grabber. But this text he's referred to as Israel, which is really the new name that God gives him. It means one who has ruled with God or reigned with God. Jacob, again, as we said, his name means heel grabber or deceiver, but it was changed to Israel, okay? One who has ruled or has reigned with God. Now, let's, I'm going to see if I can do this here. I'm going to need some help from a couple of you. We're going to kind of reenact this blessing. So, first of all, I need Jacob. I need somebody who looks kind of really old and decrepit. Bruce, you want to come on up here for just a minute and do that for me? Appreciate it. You're a good man, Bruce. Okay? That's right. Okay. This is not Bruce. This is Jacob. Okay? Have a seat there. You get to sit down for this. Okay? That's good. Okay. Now kind of turn. That's right. Face me. I'm over here. Okay? I know your eyes are a little dim. Can you see me? Can you hear me now? Okay. Very good. Now all you have to do is basically. Well, actually, I'll show you one more thing. Now I'm going to be Joseph. Okay? I need 2 sons. I need 2 young-looking guys. Alex, you come up here, okay? And then somebody else that looks really young. Jerry, you're right here. Come on up here. You look a little more mature for your age. Okay, come on up. Okay, now, these are my name is Joseph, and these are my boys, okay? This is Ephraim over here, okay? Say hi, Ephraim, okay? And this is Manasseh, okay? Now, what's going to happen is these boys are going to become Jacob's boys. He's going to adopt them. So I'm going to bring them to him. I'm going to put them before him, and he's going to lay his hands on both of their heads, okay? But the right hand, which is the hand of greater blessing, has to go on the older. So I'm going to take Manasseh over here, and I'm going to put him on, no, not the right fist, the right hand. Yeah. I'm going to put Manasseh right. Just stay there, okay, Jerry? Don't run away, okay? And I'm going to put Ephraim over here, okay? So these 2 guys are all ready now to receive Jacob's blessing. But here's what he's going to do. He's going to take his right hand, and he's going to put it on the head of Manasseh up here. Okay? Bend down a little bit. Why don't you kneel down? That's probably a good idea. It'd probably be easier for old Jacob to reach. Okay? All right. So I'm thinking he's going to put the right hand on the head of Manasseh and the left hand on the head of Ephraim. Instead, he puts his right hand on the head of Ephraim, and he crosses his hands over like this. Now all of a sudden it is Ephraim, the younger of the 2, who receives the greater blessing and who thus becomes more dominant. And it's Manasseh. Now, he's going to get blessed too. You're going to get blessed too, okay? Just not as much. Now, Joseph says, no, don't do that. You got it wrong. Oh, you got it wrong, Papa, But he says, no, right? He says no because he says, trust me, son, I know what I'm doing. And so what happens is Ephraim here becomes, and in fact Ephraim becomes the dominant tribe of the north. In fact, the northern kingdom of Israel is often referred to as simply Ephraim. So that's what's, now why is he doing this? Because when he was a pup, he was the younger son, and he got the blessing. He stole the blessing, but now he's passing it on rightfully to the two sons in the appropriate order, okay? So this is what Joseph does. This is what the story tells us. Now, as kind of sordid as this was, as kind of backward, as kind of strange sort of family dynamic, this would be an awkward moment to talk about at upcoming family reunions. But nonetheless, Jacob was a man of faith. Thanks, guys. You can go back to your seat. Okay? Yeah. Can you make it? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Alex. Okay. Now, that's what has happened. And again, when we look at these sorts of stories, we have to understand that in these narrative events, not everything goes the way we would expect or think, but God is in it, and it's still an act of faith. So Jacob blesses each of Joseph's sons. The blessing, sorry about that. The blessing was based on the Abrahamic covenant and the promises of God. That was the same thing with Joseph. When he said, make sure when you leave, you take my bones with you. We talked about that last week. We are also told, and we didn't have it here, I didn't bring a staff, but that's because it doesn't just refer to this time at all. It refers to Jacob's life in general. It says that Jacob worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff, a demonstration of his true faith in God. Because you know what kind of people use staffs? People that were pilgrims. People that were strangers who had to keep on moving, keep on keeping on, because they had no real home yet. That was coming. So Jacob crosses his hands over, blesses the younger of the two, Ephraim, and gives his blessing to him. By faith, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on his staff, the top of his staff. He was one who had, much like Abraham, much like Isaac, had not seen the actual fulfillment of the promise of God yet, but he knew that it was coming because he believed in the promise of God and knew that God was faithful. That's why he was one who leaned on his staff, because he knew that at least in this stage, the promised land was not yet his. Folks, we are a people of faith. We are looking for something that is yet to come. And we have a lot of opportunities to express our faith and demonstrate our faith. But our faith is based on a word from a God whom we know to be reliable, whom we know to be trustworthy. And it's a faith that we look at as we look forward. This was, as bizarre as it may have seemed to Joseph, this was an act of faith on the part of Jacob to ensure that the blessing went forward and continued. Old Jacob didn't have much time left. He was about ready to move on. It was all he could do to sit up in bed. It was all the energy that he had to sit up in bed. I'm not there yet, but I can tell that I'm nearer now than when I first believed, Getting up off the couch just a little bit more difficult than it was when I was 29. I can get down on the floor real well. Sometimes I don't even intend to, But getting up is a little more difficult. So Jacob is very close to the end of his life, and he trusts God, and he worships God, and he knows that God is going to be faithful to his promise, and so he passes on the blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. And that blessing indeed goes forward. And they become his sons. They are considered the sons, not of Joseph, ultimately. In fact, in Genesis 49, it says, Joseph, you can have whatever other sons you want, whatever other sons you have, but these two are mine. These two are mine. And even though they're technically Jacob's grandsons, they are his sons. An amazing, amazing story. Finally, I want to look with you at Moses' parents as well and their faith. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Like much of the narrative principles, narrative stories in the Bible, I have questions. I want to get to heaven, I want to talk to Moses' mom, and I want to say, okay, this is Moses' mom. Okay. I know that there was a horrible edict that was decreed. The Pharaoh of Egypt had said that all the Israelite boys, if they were born, were supposed to be put to death. What does this seem relevant for this day and age, doesn't it? If any boys are born to the Israelites, they're supposed to be put to death. You can let the daughters live, because the daughters, you got to realize in this era, like 1,500 years before the birth of Jesus, women are really no threat at all. In fact, women are quite convenient. You want to have them around because, A, they bear children, they can work in the house, and they're not a threat, okay? Helen Reddy had not written, I am woman, hear me roar, that kind of thing yet. That was not this culture's attitude. Boys, however, are a danger. They're a threat. Because little boys become men, and men form armies, and armies can overthrow. So you take every boy and you kill him. Now, okay, I get Mrs. Moses' mom that you wanted to hide him, especially with the fact that we learned that he was, and the word here in Greek can best be translated as striking. That's sometimes the word we use to describe someone who is particularly stands out, someone who is particularly attractive, particularly physically well put together, has a lot of good traits, someone who's quite nice looking or good looking or attractive, whatever. They saw that he was, in other words, he stood out. If you'd have gone to Moses' kindergarten class or to his 5th grade class, you would have noticed that this was a special child. This was a child who was greatly blessed, perhaps with physical appearance, with leadership skills, with strength of character. He was very bright. He was very intelligent. There's a lot of good things that are going for him. So they see that he is a striking child. They also see that he was unique, that he was blessed by God. And they hid him for 3 months in civil disobedience to the edict of Pharaoh. But I would have to ask Moses' mom, I'd say, Mrs. Moses' mom, why did you take a little bassinet and put tar on the bottom of it and put it into the river? Kind of a little risky. I know it's among the bulrushes, so there's not much current there, if any at all, but what were you thinking? I don't know the full story behind that. It's interesting. But what is important is they did this because they saw 2 things. They saw that he was a special child. There's a term in the Old Testament that is used, it's the term anointed one. And there are a number of times in the Old Testament that we run across a character individual who is an anointed individual. Most typically, the priest, the high priest, but also the kings of Israel and Judah. Our word Messiah comes from the term anointed one. Messiah, Moses was not the Messiah, obviously, but he was a special, chosen, and blessed and enabled young man by God. So they hide him. They do so in disobedience to the edict of Pharaoh. This was not supposed to be a child that lived. This was supposed to be a child who was put to death. In fact, if you remember the midwives in Egypt, they feared the Lord. And when they were confronted and asked, well, why have you let the baby boys live? And they say, well, you have to understand, that the Israelite women are more strong and more hardy than the Egyptian women. So when we hear they go into labor, by the time we get there, they've already given birth. So there's nothing we can do. That's not the truth, but that was the story that they gave. They did this because they were not afraid of the king's edict. The faith of Jacob was a faith that looked back at the promise of God and looked forward to what the expectation was. And thus he could bless the sons of Joseph. The faith of Moses' parents was a faith that knew that they had to obey God regardless of what the ruler said, regardless of what the laws said, regardless of what the culture said. Folks, there are people this morning who are worshiping or have worshipped or will worship all over the world in places where it is not legal to do so. We are worshiping in full public display. In fact, we're twice as good as anybody else. We got 2 churches here. We are worshiping. We got a sign, okay, a sign that's got my name on it. Thank you very much. So if anybody gets taken down, it's going to be me, first of all, apparently. That's all right. But we're here, and we don't think anything of that. We don't, like I've said to you many times, I drive all over Muskegon and from time to time, and we got a church on every corner. I don't know I know Grand Rapids got a lot of churches, but Muskegon's got an awful lot as well. I'd be interested in the rate per capita of churches. I bet it's roughly similar to Grand Rapids. That's a wonderful thing. It's an amazing thing. You don't see that in a lot of places around the world. Christians around the world, a lot of places have to worship underground. They have to worship in secret. Now, they have 2 choices, because in many places, they will at least be persecuted if they worship. At worst, they'll be put to death. But they worship anyway. Tertullian, the great church father, said the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. He said essentially, if every Christian that the Roman Empire tries to destroy or wipe out, 2 more pop up to take its place. Folks, it is easy to worship God when we are swimming in the same direction as the stream of the culture. It's easy when you're not persecuted, when there's no price to pay in that sense for worshiping, for obeying God, for following God's edict, God's instruction. But when the laws of the land and when the principles of the culture and the attitudes of the culture stand in 180-degree opposition, as often they do, to the Church of Jesus Christ and to the Word of God, when taking a stand costs you something, then we find out who really is prepared to take a stand. Being publicized as pastor of First Baptist Church and having my name on a sign, going across to the drugstore and have the lady, I just chat with her, and she says, "Oh, you must be Andy Smith. You the pastor across the street?" I say, "Yep, that's me." When it's kind of cool to be recognized as a Jesus follower, as a Christ follower, that's not too bad. But when it costs you something, when you have to hide your child for 3 months, when you have to live in fear every day that the king's men might be coming. I had breakfast this morning in Holland with my grandchildren and their parents, whatever their names are. It's all about the grandkids, right? And that's always fun. They really weren't fully awake yet. This is about 8 o'clock. And our grandson came through the door and tripped and fell. And he was okay. He was fine, but he just wasn't awake yet. You could tell. What kind of society are they going to live in 10, 20 years? I don't know. Am I afraid? A little. I am. Do I trust in God? Absolutely. I'm hoping that well before 20 years is up, Jesus is going to come back. Well, that would be fine with me. But I don't know. I do know this, that the book of Revelation speaks very clearly about the fact that it's not that Christians, the city, the New Jerusalem, that they're immune from persecution. The message of the book of Revelation is that when persecution comes, you'll be able to get through it because God will always be faithful. And even if it costs you your life, you will be renewed in the resurrection. And as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, this momentary light affliction will be of no value when compared to the eternal weight of glory that is to come over. Having to take your newborn male child and put him in a little complicated waterproof bassinet and put him in the river to save his life because the king says he has to die. That took some real faith. Stepping out to serve Jesus Christ and saying, I don't care what the culture does or what the culture says. I am going to serve the Lord. As Joshua says to the people of Israel after Moses died, he said, you choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You know that one of the things that Joseph said to the people of Israel after Moses died, he said, okay, I want you all to put away your Egyptian gods. What? Did you know that some of the Israelites at the Exodus left Egypt and they took some Egyptian gods' statues with them? Did you know that? What in the world? It's kind of like, if I come around to visit you, what would I find at your house, Oh, this is just my little altar to Baal. No big deal. Okay? I just use it once a week or so. That's amazing. Do you know that Israel and then later the nation of Judah struggled with idol worship all the way up to the exile? After they came back from the Babylonian exile, boy, whatever the Babylonian exile, whatever 70 years of living in Babylon did to the Jewish people, it got rid of idol worship, that's for sure. But not fully. What are the little idols that you and I are worshiping? It's a good question to ask ourselves. So, do I have faith like Jacob? My faith is in the next generation. Okay, Alex, by the grace of God, you're going to be here long after I'm gone. And a lot of people like you. So, symbolically, we lay our hands upon people like you. Because you're the next generation of the church. Likewise, the cost of discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's biography. That's the title of it. What is the cost? What does it cost? What does it cost me? What is it going to cost you to serve and follow Jesus? What are we going to have to give up to serve and follow Jesus? If you think, oh, I don't know, nothing, then that's a problem. Because it is. I'm going to lead us in prayer, and then we're going to have a short video, and then the rock will